Well, good morning. Good morning. That's the way we do it here in Silicon Valley. Welcome to the Computer History Museum. And it's just a delight to be with you. And congratulations. I'd like to add my congratulations to Jeff's for you being here at IBMC 2017. Here at the museum, we are the leading museum for computing history. We have an extensive collection, over 120,000 artifacts, over 800 oral histories of pioneers. You'll have a chance to look at two of our main exhibits today. We also have two other buildings, one dedicated to research in our digital collection, and one that is focused on all the rest of the kind of a warehouse full of our things. We have an extensive event program that's broadcast globally, and also an award-winning education program. So welcome to the Computer History Museum. I thought I'd start today, what I was asked is to give some context and some of the stories that shape the DNA of Silicon Valley. Here's the garage of Hewlett-Packard, just about 2 miles away from here, and it was a fall day when David and Bill met each other. They happened to share the same professor at Stanford, and one of the weekends early in that fall, they went up to Yosemite, a nearby national park, to go hiking. And while they were up there, they found that they shared some common interests in some technical questions. Very different background, different parts of the country that they had come from, different kinds of educational background, but they started this friendship that over time evolved into a partnership. They shared a common mentor, and if you fast forward a few years, they decided that they would start their company together. So on New Year's Day, they were there together, Hewlett and Packard, Packard and Hewlett. They took a coin and decided whoever won the coin flip would get their name first. Well, you know who won. It was Hewlett, and Packard. They are ground zero for Silicon Valley. In this garage, which is just down the road, they bootstrapped the very first products. First ones weren't successful. The second ones, they tried different kinds of customers. It turned out that a fledgling company called Walt Disney bought their first 8 audio oscilloscopes to do the movie Fantasia. From that, they evolved into electronics and equipment. They are the beginning of the DNA of the Valley because of this essential complementary partnership, this collaborative spirit, and the bootstrapping that happened in the garage. Next, we have the Traitorous Eight. These are the wonderkind scientists who had been recruited from all over the country to come join Nobel Prize laureate Bill Shockley here at Fairchild's, at Shockley Semiconductor. He was a fantastic, brilliant person on the cutting edge of technology, but he was the worst manager ever. They decided they could not take it anymore. And so one fateful day, they met in San Francisco, and the 8 of them decided that they would strike out on their own. It was, in fact, the first time here on the West Coast, and actually in any kind of technology company, where there was a company, there were people that spun out and started their own, that risk-taking to start their own company. What kind of organization would they have? What kind of contract would they make? It wasn't going to be hierarchical. They did not want that kind of organization that they had had from Bill Shockley. So what did they do? They took 8 crisp dollar bills, and they said, let's each sign our name on them, and that will be our contract to each other. Together, they pioneered the silicon that would become Silicon Valley. Here in our collection, we're very proud to have 1,300 of the first notebooks from them, and you'll see in our lobby 3 of them at the base of this exhibit that show the essential ideas from Jean Harney, Bob Noyce, and Gordon Moore that created microprocessors. So they brought together this daring, risk-taking spirit of spinning out to a startup. They brought together, again, complementary skills for technology. They also brought together this idea that they were going to have an egalitarian, horizontal organizational structure. From that company, founded in 1957, came a whole generation of other companies: Intel, AMD, and many more. You'll see the generations of over now 400 companies that can tie their genealogy directly back to Fairchild Semiconductor. It was not only a place for technology innovation and organizational innovation, but also economic innovation. Two of the alumni founded two of the major venture capital firms, Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins, who are still storied companies here in the Valley, who became pioneers for this idea of risk-taking capital, investing in entrepreneurs like the Traitorous Eight. If we were to fast forward, this story, of course, has been repeated and again and again. In this case, at Stanford again, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They actually were not fast friends. Unlike Bill and Dave, they could not stand each other. Larry was taking Sergey around the campus, and they kept arguing about everything. They irritated each other. They saw the world in different ways. But as it turned out, they had their offices next to each other, and this dialogue became a very productive dialogue, that they had distinct views of the world, but they pushed each other to see things in different ways. They pushed each other to change their views. They pushed each other to create kind of new ideas. And you're familiar with Google, which is now next door. This story has been repeated again and again. And with them, we see not only this partnership that came, but this bootstrapping that has continued. This is another one of the jewels in our collection downstairs that you'll see. This is a Google Quark server. And if you look very closely at it, you'll see evidence of bootstrapping. Can you see it? First of all, they were pulling together products from the neighborhood electronics store and building something to support the incredible traffic that they were getting in their dorm room. And all the equipment was so heavy it started to sag. Do you see that? The metal. And then, because they had never done this before, it got so hot it overheated and started to melt. So they put in the quark as insulators. So all around us are evidences of these fundamental skills, attributes, and sort of spirit of entrepreneurs that we celebrate that have been a long time part of here in the Valley. So it's really this combination of innovation, technology innovation, business model innovation, process innovation, and entrepreneurship that have created this phenomenon that we call Silicon Valley today. It's this combination of technology change, economic value creation, and social impact. And in fact, that combination is what we here think creates exponential change and exponential growth. And that's why we named our center Exponential. When we think about Silicon Valley, this combination of technology, innovation, and economic value creation, social impact has happened not just in one generation, but what really makes this place remarkable is that it's been in 5 distinct generations of technology, one after another. In fact, if you were to look going back to the 50s, we started with the story of Hewlett-Packard and then Fairchild. In every one of these generations of information technology, a new company has been born and grown to be a global leader in its industry. If we were to look at it another way, this has not only fueled technology change over these successive waves, starting with the defense industry and integrated circuits, moving to personal computing, the internet, social, mobile, and beyond now. It's also fueled job creation and job growth. In fact, during the recession, you can see the cycle of boom and bust, which has characterized Silicon Valley and most high-tech regions around the world. During times of bust, for example, in the recession, the Great Recession, 2008, Silicon Valley was the last to go into the recession and the first out of it. In the past year, there have actually been 200,000 jobs created here in Silicon Valley. That's why you see so much traffic. Another thing that's important to look at the change over time is that information technology is one strand, but it's not the only one. In fact, we track 6 major kinds of technology here: hardware, software, bio, clean energy, information, or what we call innovation services. So there's this confluence of different disciplines, and it's really at that intersection that often the innovation comes. For example, the internet and computing and communication. And we're seeing that now in bioinformatics, industrial Internet of Things, autonomous cars, and others. But we're really at this confluence or intersection of multiple strands of technology. Well, this place is not only characterized by birth and growth of companies, but by death. This disruption is characterized by this incredible churn. So if just taking a 35-year time period, if we were to go back in time to 1982, this list of 10 companies were the companies that were leading the Valley by sales. And you can see if we were to fast forward that 60% of them no longer existed 35 years later. Similarly, if we look at the list of companies with largest sales today, you can see that 40% of them are less than 35 years old, and many of them just about 10 or 15 years old. So this risk-taking is not only creating, but also open to destruction of companies. What characterizes this kind of a place, and how do we explain what makes it tick? We have so many visitors that come here and wonder, is there a recipe for Silicon Valley? Of course not. There are certain attributes that have characterized the environment. But one of the things that distinguishes it is that it's definitely not been a plantation model. In fact, my grandmother, that I was named after, Marguerite, was born and raised on a pineapple plantation in Hawaii. And if you've been to a plantation, you know that everything is attuned to a single crop. That has a very powerful advantage in that as long as all goes well, that you can maximize the productivity for that single crop. But if the environment changes, in the case of this pineapple plantation, when the weather changed, when there was a drought, when there were pests that came, it was highly vulnerable and in fact failed. If we look at regions around the country, many of them, Detroit, for example, became kind of a plantation style of cluster where everything was attuned in a somewhat rigid way around a single industry. In contrast, Silicon Valley is what you might consider a rainforest, diverse, flexible, dynamic, and complex. And those regions like Silicon Valley and others that have, as I've mentioned, multiple kinds of technologies, multiple industries, have proven over time to be more flexible, dynamic, and creative. In this book, The Silicon Valley Edge, that some co-authors and I did with Stanford Press, we pointed out 12 different features. It's really not a recipe, but they're common over time for Silicon Valley and also other regions that have been developing for what kind of explains this ability to create and recreate leading edge. I think none of them will surprise you, but I'd like to just summarize them and ask you to think not only does this make sense with my understanding of Silicon Valley, but think about your own ecosystem where you're building your company. Are there some of these features that maybe you could help build or strengthen where you are building your venture? The first is this high concentration of diverse and high-skilled talent. The second is this, that it doesn't really matter as much where you're from or what your degrees are or what your family name is, but it's focused on results and a meritocracy. To be sure, Silicon Valley is not perfect, and it deserves a heightened attention for bringing more recognition for women in other areas. But in general, compared to many other places, there has been this focus on results. The third is a climate that rewards risk-taking and tolerates failure, and not just once, but several times if you're a smart person at learning your lessons. So I want to dispel one of the common myths which people often quote and say that people in Silicon Valley love failure. Actually only love failure if you're learning and not repeating the mistake. I think that's obvious. This culture of possibility, some historians think that it came from the pioneer spirit of the gold rush era, that there's this concept that we can change the world and incredible optimism. Some people call it an outsized ego. You can decide for yourself. High quality of life and not too bad weather that attracts people. Specialized business infrastructure, perhaps most famous, is a cluster of venture capitalists around Sand Hill Road. But actually, when you map all of the business services, they actually are all microclusters. The main high-tech lawyers are actually clustered together. A lot of the design firms are clustered together. And that reflects this really complex and dense networks where a lot of the highest value-added interaction comes from informal, unplanned, and ad hoc frequent interaction. Of course, universities and research institutes and a strong capital and labor market that enables this flexible mobility of the most important things that drive innovation, entrepreneurship, people, and money. The networks of people, not only within and among the valley, but also between the valley and globally. This open environment that supports both collaboration and competition, and favorable government policies. You know, it's interesting, a lot of people who come from places that have very strong government involvement are surprised to find out that there are actually zero government policies that have specifically targeted Silicon Valley over other regions. But the government policies that have been highly important here were things like research support from the government, portable pension plans, support for limited partnerships like for venture capital. Those are things that are common across the American economy. And last but not least, Silicon Valley is its strength comes not only from what's brought here and attracted here, but its ability to link and leverage globally. I wanted to just show you a few statistics that kind of bring to life some of these elements. The first, when we talk about diverse and highly skilled people, the joke goes that the secret of Silicon Valley has been ICs, and people don't mean integrated circuits, they mean Indians and Chinese. And the numbers show that actually 37% of the people who live here in Silicon Valley were born outside of the United States. And if you look on the other chart at mathematics or engineering, it's over 67% of the people that are foreign-born. So it's a very open environment where people feel comfortable and attracted to come from around the world and to work. Relationships can be built easily. There's a flow among companies, and that's certainly been critical. The second key element, as I mentioned, is capital. There's a very high concentration of capital. Silicon Valley has attracted nearly 40% of all venture capital invested in the United States consistently over time, between 33 and 40%. So what's important, I think, is not just looking at the concentration, but the change over time. Because capital, as we know, is mobile and can be, will follow opportunity. So VCs consistently feel that there are great opportunities here. But you can see that over time, the percentage investment in various industry sectors has changed dramatically. And you can see, for example, in the last few years, this reduction in internet and increase in mobile and in other areas. So what have been some of the results? If we were to kind of make a map of what the Valley looked like in 2000 and then 2015, we could see that the blue bubbles represent large companies by market value between $50 and $500 billion. And so we see in 2015, I'd like just to point out three things that I think might be interesting for you to understand about the Valley here. One is this incredible change in just a decade of market cap creation, over $3 trillion in addition of value, market value addition over 10 years. The second is this extension that Silicon Valley used to be very clustered where we are here in the South Bay, and over time it's now become what we consider kind of a barbell economy with a lot of action here, but also in San Francisco. And there are different kinds of companies in each of the areas, so it's a distinct but complementary and connected economy between both areas. The third thing I think that's interesting to look at is this increased dramatic acceleration in new companies that we call unicorn companies, sort of private companies at a valuation of $1 billion or more, and those are represented here by the red bubbles. That's a new phenomenon and rapidly growing. Of the top 10 unicorn companies, you can guess how many are from the United States? 6. How many are of those from the United States are from Silicon Valley? 100%. Where are the other top companies from? China. All from China, and number 11 is from India, Flipkart. So we're seeing now not only a concentration within the geographic clusters between these two places within Silicon Valley, but we're also seeing clusters of clusters globally of other rising regions as well. So it's important if we're thinking about sort of high-impact companies and entrepreneurship to think about how we can impact the world. And we like to tell stories of this sort of 1 to 1 billion. Some of the most remarkable and iconic companies and entrepreneurs have truly built 1 to 1 billion stories. If you were to think about Intel and the number of circuits that are being used by devices around the world, more than 1 billion. If you were to think about the market valuation of companies created, going from 1 to 1 billion, Apple with its now over $800 billion in market cap. Social impact, Facebook now with over 1 billion users per month. Those are one important way to look at impact. And as we think about how that's happened, it's happened through platforms, it's happened through innovation and growth. And these companies that are built to last or that are growing are the ones that we love to document here in the museum. Not only Facebook, but also Apple. In fact, this year we have a year-long study on the iPhone as a sort of transformative product, if you were to think about something that's radically changed how people interact and what we do in terms of creating a whole app economy. Computing in your pocket through the smartphone has been one of them. But the story is not just with these large companies. As I mentioned, it's with this array of unicorns. And you can see, as I mentioned, this acceleration and concentration of companies happening most in the last 3 years. But what of companies that haven't had a smooth ride? It's sometimes easy to look back and say, oh, well, of course, this is what they did, and that's how they created their value. And I thought it would be kind of fun to mention a handful of companies here around the valley that did not have a smooth ride, that have pivoted, that have changed their business model, especially important for you as you think about being here at IBMC. Statistics show that more than 25% of startups fail within their first year, and 1/3 won't even see their 5th anniversary. And one of the things in study after study that distinguishes those that succeed are when it's strong leadership combined with innovation, with the ability to respond and to opportunities and challenges, so this flexibility and adaptation. But what time is it for an entrepreneur to choose to change and hold on to and stay the course and to push through? And when is it time for the leader to make an adjustment? In this case, if you recognize these guys here, there was an original idea that was for a firm called Confinity in 1999 that was allowing people to beam their payments between each other in these newfangled personal digital assistants being created by Palm Computer at the time, and sort of a precursor to today's smartphone. That early concept then merged together with another company called XCOM, and through some iterations of payment, changing the platform, the technology platform, as well as the processing, that's what became PayPal. And PayPal, once it became the preferred payment for eBay, has of course been propelled into processing fame. Twitter is another company that started in a different way. Anyone know? This started as a podcasting platform, and the idea was people would want to find podcasts, be able to create their own and share. The problem was iTunes 4.9 was released, and that was the end of any kind of independent podcasting, so they were dead in the water. The founders said that they had 2 weeks to come up with a new business model, and in fact, Jack Dorsey and Biz Stone came up with the idea of SMS microblogging, which became Twitter. Pandora. Pandora, the essential idea for that came from this music genome project, a very ambitious big data project before its time that you could actually characterize all the elements of music and then create a profile for a person. And the first idea was to have it be a B2C platform in music stores so that when people were listening to they could listen to tracks of a record or a CD in a music store, and then once you listen to one, the software would suggest another one that you might buy. Of course, music stores were dying and moving to digital, and so the key insight there was to flip the model and to make it direct to consumer and to change the platform from software in a brick and mortar place to being online. Tote. Tote was this idea for shopping where people could mark what they liked at a store, maybe be notified if there were new sales coming up, and then start to share it with their friends. They found out that the e-commerce part wasn't most attractive, but really it was having these curated collections that that women like to share with their friends, and that created the basis for Pinterest. Bourbon was an idea to bring people together on a social platform, and you could play games, you could share information, and all kinds of other things. In fact, it was so cluttered that the founders said, we should actually just focus on one thing. And after testing a whole bunch of users, the thing that had the most traction was photos. And so they stripped everything away and focused on photos, and that's Instagram. Each of these stories is sort of at this intersection of innovation and entrepreneurship. But I want to emphasize that it's important to think about that not only for the economic value creation. Many people tend to focus on that and think that that's what's most attractive. I would also like to put out a call to you to think about the social impact. There's great need in our world. In fact, Silicon Valley is criticized often that too many people are chasing quick money for yet one more app that's really not making that much difference. So my challenge to you is to think about opportunities to change the world and to flip this idea from being $1 to $1 billion or 1 to 1 billion devices, and think about the next billion people who are waiting to be brought into the economy, the people who are at the lowest part of the pyramid, those who are less advantaged, those who have been left behind. 2 years ago, 193 countries gathered in New York for the United Nations, and in that they signed a common agreement, a vision of what the world might look like in 15 years. What would the world look like in 2030? At that time, there were 8 different areas that they focused on, and number 8 was about the importance, the critical importance for the global health, welfare, and community of the combination of innovation, social creation, and entrepreneurship. Steve Case, who was the first global ambassador for the UN, said at that time, we need 1 billion new jobs because of the demographics in 15 years. Entrepreneurship is the most powerful way. It's been shown to create 70% of the new jobs, around the world through new companies being born, and in some developing countries, up to 90%. At that time, he issued a call globally for entrepreneurs around the world to step up, to step forward, and to think about their role in not only building a company, but growing the economy and the future health for the world. I'm really delighted to see all of you here and think about what's brought you here. And my challenge is, as you think about building and this growth of change that's going from 1 to 1 billion, whether it's through technology innovation, business model innovation, that as you do that, that you will think about not only creating economic impact for you and those around you through jobs, but also social impact, and think about the people that you can help change their lives in better ways as well. Just want to close with this idea that this idea of reinvention has been at the spirit and the heart of Silicon Valley and regions really around the world to create and recreate their leading edge. These same principles that have been true for a region characterize the most dynamic entrepreneurs and the most dynamic companies. To improve is to change, and as Winston Churchill said, to be perfect is to change often. I wish you all the luck as you continue to iterate in your business models and your companies. I wish you all the best in the competition. Thank you. I love interacting with people, so I wanted to know if you might have some contradictions, different views, questions, comments. Somebody has to go first. Please.
I think that was an excellent speech.
Thank you. I'm curious, I would love to your question. A thought for you. I've described this region in a certain way. I'm really curious to know how you think about the ecosystem where you're building your companies and how you compare or contrast and how that's affecting what you're doing as an entrepreneur. Go ahead.
I guess kind of have a question about Silicon Valley. So you've said a lot of things that are really, really good about it, about how fantastic it is for innovation, entrepreneurship. Is there anything that might not be so fantastic about it?
So many things.
And how some people hear one day we should know?
Yeah. That's a whole long conversation, but let me point out, I'll just start with 3 things that are really, I think, significant right now. One is that there's a very high cost of living and a high cost of business here, which has serious implications. It's not just for businesses, but for the quality of life for people. So actually more than 30% of the people here cannot afford to buy a home in Silicon Valley, the median income. We have 20%, more than 20% of the population who are receiving federal assistance, so are considered at the poverty line. So there's bifurcation between very rich and the very poor. So those, to me, are unacceptable social impact that's affecting the quality of life here and something that's attracting a lot of attention. The second area is that because of this very rapid growth, change in a constricted area there's no more places to build highways, no more places to build homes. There are just incredible delays from traffic. And so we actually have 100,000 people that live here in the South Bay, that work in San Francisco, that ride over an hour every day north. We have 100,000 people that live in San Francisco who love the urban lifestyle and who work in companies like Google and who transport. So that leads to gridlock in both directions. That's the second area where there's actually very difficult infrastructure problems that are impacting people. And the third, I would say, is there's been an increasing disconnect politically between viewpoints here in Silicon Valley among both business leaders and people here about priorities. One, for example, is immigration and the role, how important is it to have immigrants. And you can see from the statistics, the leaders here want open immigration for all people, H-1B visas to be able to come here. And there's this larger and larger conflict or disconnect between political views here in Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C., which are creating cleavages. So those are just three of the challenges. Please.
This bifurcation that you talked about between the haves and the have-nots, how do you, what type of innovation is being done in terms of discussion and leadership ideas that bring together ideas that have been time-tested, such as the law of the harvest, the survival of the fittest, you know, because that's how, you know, creative innovation also is creative destruction at the same time. So how do you propose, or how are business leaders or other leaders getting together to solve that? And one other just question so for example, I remember being in Banff Springs years ago, and was out with hiking with a guide, and he said, remember, do not feed the animals, because a fed animal is a dead animal. And without almost thinking, I said, but sometimes a fed human is a dead human, meaning you take away their skill, you take away their motivation, you take away their opportunities to be able to thrive, and you make them sort of wards of the state. How do we come together to solve those ideas, those problems?
So I'm happy to report that the Valley is not only a place of technology innovation, but actually there's a tremendous amount of civic innovation or civic entrepreneurs, people who are very committed to having creative public-private partnerships to address these kind of social issues. Two examples, there are a lot of retraining programs. Some of the people are willing to work. It's just that many of the jobs that are here continue, because they're evolving so rapidly, people are not able to upscale their job skills. And so there's a lot of creative ways for people to retool and retrain to continuously know what sort of the latest software tools are. So that's one area. The second is a lot of mentoring that brings together people who are successful and those who have been left out of the opportunity, whether because of socioeconomic background or gender or experience or education. And so this kind of mentoring through apprenticeships and interns has also been really effective. One last comment or question? That's a great question, and of course it's a question not only for Silicon Valley, but also for regions around the world that are looking for effective models. I don't think that the Silicon Valley is a one-size-fits-all model. In fact, I've been involved with a lot of other regions that have tried to copy Silicon Valley, and it's really important to think about what the distinct competitive advantages are that stay with a place, and also what a place can attract, because so many things now, people and capital are mobile. And to this, just before just one more thing for context, that Silicon Valley so far has been the only what I would call general purpose region that's been able to have so many successive ways of technology, and then also have them across industry. Most other places have maybe had one or two technology generations, or in one specific area. If you think of New York and finance, or Hollywood and movies, that's been it. So as far as being able to jumpstart or be a fast follower, certainly many, many regions are doing that very well, and taking some of the attributes and building them, and then also mixing them with our own local strengths. And the third, I think, important piece of that is making sure that they're an active part in playing a role in the global network. And so I would point to, I think, In China, for example, Beijing, around in Zhongguancun and around Shenzhen are great examples. And we've seen other places like in London, around in Shoreditch, that are trying and have had a resurgence. So there's a tremendous amount of growth, and that would be that's a fascinating talk for another time to see which regions are rising and why, and how that is changing. Certainly, one of the key determinants for any region to have to be vibrant is their ability to link and leverage to be what I call an orchestrator, to play this orchestrator role. We see the power of that, for example, in Apple, that does it on a single company basis across the global supply chain, and that same principle is true for regions as well. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and again, congratulations for being here at IBMC.